We are entering hour number 4 of Magic Valley this morning. Our next guest actually was in Idaho just this past summer. He was speaking at a Liberty Forum, and he's making a return visit. Next week, he's going to be speaking in several locations across the state, including Twin Falls. Tuesday night, he'll be at the College of Southern Idaho. His name is Alex Newman. He writes about education issues and really just our future and about the future of our children. In his work for such publications as WorldNet Daily, New American, and Crisis Magazine. 38 right now, 6 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you, too, on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And first of all, Alex, is it Dr. or Mr. Newman?
Just Mr. You can just call me Alex.
Okay, well, that's great. I want to make sure I get that straight. One of my former bosses told me many, many years ago, he said, people definitely want to be known by their titles or whatever they earned when they were working hard, getting their way through college. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Quickly, you're going to be speaking in Twin Falls on the 19th, and I think you're in Idaho Falls and a couple of other locations too. But for people who are unfamiliar with your work, can you give us a bit of a synopsis of what you're going to be talking about?
Sure. I've worked in all kinds of different areas, but I'll be speaking in Idaho about the crisis that we have in education. And crisis may be an understatement. If you look at the polling data, the overwhelming majority of our young people now are socialists. They reject Christianity. They reject God. They reject the principles of individual liberty. They reject our Constitution. And they're about ready to burn America to the ground. They also can't read properly. They can't do even basic math. So we are in an existential crisis that quite literally threatens the future of our nation, of our churches, of our children, of our families, of our freedoms. And if we don't get a handle on it, we're going to lose everything that we hold dear. So that's what I'll be talking about. And, the real point is this was deliberate, right? This was engineered this way. It wasn't some kind of tragic accident that nobody knew what was happening. This was deliberately engineered. So, when people say we need to fix it, I say, what are you going to fix? It's working perfectly, right? It's doing exactly what it was intended to do. It's cranking out millions of little socialists who can't tell right from wrong and can't read properly and don't know anything about history. So that's kind of the crux of the issue, and we call it rescuing our children because we really do need to rescue our children. But beyond that, rescuing our children serves a dual purpose, and that is the ability to rescue our nation and our freedoms as well.
I started, I think, kindergarten right about the time that Lyndon Johnson was leaving Washington and Richard Nixon was arriving, so that's more than 50 years ago. And at the time, there was a popular book, and it was being reported on breathlessly across the country about why Johnny couldn't read. And here we are, decades later, and we still struggle with all of this. And other than throwing a lot of money at it, nobody has really. And I remember being at a birthday party for a friend of mine in high school, and a group of retired school teachers were telling us that what really ruined things after Sputnik, there was this belief we had to change the direction of education. So they're going back 60 years in this country, and they felt that we dropped the ball then with the direction that we just threw away everything that we knew prior to 1958 or so, and took off in a direction, and nobody really questioned it. When you hear these types of stories, why is it taking us 50 to 60 years though to say, hey, how come we haven't done anything yet?
It really is an amazing story. You mentioned Why Johnny Can't Read by Rudolph Flesch, published in 1955. That was a phenomenal book. It was amazing that came out. But the full story goes back way before that. In fact, the quackery that Rudolph Flesch was exposing actually was first tried out in the public schools of Boston, back when public schools were a new thing, under a socialist named Horace Mann, who also rejected Christianity. He's really the one who imported this dangerous idea of mandatory government schooling for all children to equalize all men. You want to get the Bible out under the guise of combating sectarianism. He led an experiment where he introduced this quackery called the whole word method of teaching reading. And it was a total disaster. I mean, within a few years, the kids couldn't read. They were showing symptoms of what today we would call dyslexia. And so they stopped the experiment. All the schoolmasters in Boston rose up. They wrote a phenomenal essay, and they said, look, this doesn't work. This is why it doesn't work. We're not going to do it anymore. Nice try, Horace Mann, but that's it. We tried your way. It didn't work, and now we're going to go back to doing what we've done for thousands of years. And they did. Then came John Dewey. about 50 years later and resurrected this quackery. I can almost guarantee you that he resurrected it knowing full well what it would do. And one of the reasons I know that is because he set up an experimental school with Rockefeller money, and the kids who graduated from that experimental school couldn't read, right? So they said, that'll be perfect. We'll do that nationwide. After World War II, it really caught on because that's when all these school districts suddenly had all this money. We weren't fighting the war anymore. They could go out and buy all these quack new materials that Dewey and his disciples were putting together. And as incredible as it may sound, the Rudolph Fleisch's book caused a national scandal, and a lot of schools were forced to put some phonics back in so the kids could at least do some basic reading. But you may not be surprised to know, but I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that this quackery is still mandatory under the Common Core national education standards that Obama brought in. And again, it's not an accident. Again, we've known this is quackery since the 1840s. We've known that children don't learn how to read this way since the 1840s when it was first tried. And the fact that they're still doing it today, I think, is evidence of malice aforethought. And frankly, I think the ringleaders behind all this ought to be prosecuted because they have dumbed down the nation in a way that wouldn't have even been thinkable. A couple centuries ago, we went from being the most literate society on planet Earth to being a society where, according to the federal government's own data, about half of us are functionally illiterate or so close to it that we can't even hold down a proper job or lead a normal life. And our country's not going to be able to survive like this. So.
Our guest, Alex Newman, joining us this morning. He'll be speaking at the College of Southern Idaho next Tuesday night here in Twin Falls, and he's going to be talking about rescuing our children and how we can rescue them from an educational system that is, as he just pointed out, really dumbed them down. Bill Colley with you as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 36 as we come up on 9:13. I have a piece today, Alex, from a publication called Idaho Education News, and the writers are saying that the Idaho Education Department was going to be releasing a series of reading scores for elementary school students, and apparently mysteriously has delayed those, and now they've even they're throwing up a roadblock to this publication getting access to those reading scores. And of course, it says when the fall scores are released in full, they could come under close scrutiny. It says Idaho legislators doubled the budget for early literacy programs, which means a lot more money's been thrown at it. So even in red states, what we think of as being a conservative bastion of middle America, even in red states, it appears we're still seeing the same thing, right?
Oh, there's no question about it. This is a nationwide problem. I know people in like rural Montana and rural Idaho and rural Wyoming. We're immune to that. Absolutely not. The reading data from across the United States is clear. The federal government just released the National Assessment of Educational Progress a couple of weeks ago, and what they found was that more than 2/3 of eighth graders are not proficient in a single core subject. So they can't even reach basic proficiency on the dumbest of the dumbed-down math standards we've ever had. They can't even reach basic proficiency on the dumbest of the dumbed-down reading standards we've ever had. If that's not a crisis, and we're spending almost $20,000 a year, in some cases $25,000 per year per pupil, and they can't even read their high school diplomas. Again, if anybody thinks that's an accident, talk to me after the show. We've got some real nice beachfront property in Nebraska to sell. So
now, when you mentioned that clearly this was intentional, there's a reason that somebody wanted to have them dumbed down and maybe to make them more pliable. That would be my guess.
That's exactly what it was. And fortunately, Bill, we don't actually have to speculate on this. The people who created this mess left a very long paper trail. People like John Dewey, he's pretty much universally regarded as the founding father of America's public school system. I think in fairness, some of the blame ought to be assigned to Horace Mann and even Robert Owen before him. But John Dewey left an enormous trail of essays and articles and books and papers and scholarly journals outlining his ideas. He actually wrote his religious manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto. He was one of the signers, one of the drafters of this. And his agenda was crystal clear. He wanted to fundamentally transform America. He didn't like Christianity. He didn't like individual liberty. He wanted to get rid of private property, get rid of the free market system, get rid of the church. And that was his goal with this public school system. And a lot of people don't realize that. But again, he laid it out for us loud and clear in his essays, in his books. He openly said, we don't need to teach little children how to read, write, and do math. What they really need is to be properly socialized so they can see that they're part of a greater whole and act for the common good. This is the same quackery that the Soviets would later say, the creation of the new Soviet man. And John Dewey actually went to the Soviet Union, and he wrote back about how great it was and how we should implement those ideas here. They're instilling a collectivistic mentality in the children. And you're right. Children who can't read their Bible, children who can't read the Declaration of Independence, children who can't open an encyclopedia or read a history book, they're much more easy to manipulate and control than the incredible, highly educated society we had before these maniacs came along and hijacked our education system.
I was thinking about the opposition we often get to people who want to send their children to maybe a private Christian school or they homeschool them. I have friends who they raised 9 kids and homeschooled them, and even though he was the city lawyer, the corporation counsel where they lived, the local school district would give them nothing but grief when it would come to trying to even get a hold of testing materials. There's an open hostility, it seems, and it's being fueled. I would imagine by a number of different factions, unions, but also various people in academia who despite what their pronouncements are, this is what they want to remain in place, and they don't want any challenges.
That's right. They're totalitarians to the core, and they see the children as the children of the state rather than the responsibility of the parents. And this has been a common thread through every totalitarian regime for the last century. Hitler, he put a lot of money into his military and all that, but really the core of his strategy to build up this 1,000-year Reich was to brainwash the children. He was actually the first leader anywhere in human history to make it a crime for parents to homeschool their own children. The first ever. Stalin understood this. Mao understood this. All of the totalitarians understood that if you really want to build lasting change and you want to secure political power for your oppressive regime, the way to do it is to brainwash the children. Totalitarians in America understood that as well. And so there is a very strong push to end educational liberty in America. The state of New York now is trying to mandate what private schools are allowed to teach. The government of Sweden recently banned homeschooling and started kidnapping homeschooled children. And I think what they're worried about, Bill, is I'm sure you know the story of the boy who pointed out the emperor had no clothes. They're worried that if a single child slips through the cracks of their indoctrination system and points out that, hey, the emperor is naked, suddenly the rest of the people might be like, wait a minute, maybe he really is naked. Can we say that? And so they want to make sure that every last child is subjected to really what I would call in many cases child abuse, the deliberate dumbing down of our children. I mean, now all over the country they're teaching kindergartners that they can mutilate their genitals and choose to be a different gender. I mean, some of this stuff is so asinine that if you had said it a few years ago, people would have said, like, that's crazy, that's never going to happen. Well, that's here now, right? And they don't want anybody to escape from it. So the UN has been very clear about this too. A couple of years ago, the dictator-controlled UN Human Rights Council passed a resolution saying it was unacceptable that we had all of these unregulated private schools and homeschools that weren't using global standards and all this. It's garbage, right? They want to get rid of educational liberty because they want every last child brought into their make-believe reality that they're trying to concoct.
We've got to get to a break in just a moment, but quickly, I just want to recap. Alex Newman is going to be speaking at the College of Southern Idaho next Tuesday night. That's, I believe, at 7 p.m., and it's called Rescuing Our Children. And when we take a break in about 30 seconds, when we return from the break, what we'll do is we'll just ask for some potential solutions from our guest, because I know a lot of people out there, you probably feel, what can I do? And so we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, it's 37 right now. We're coming up on 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Cowley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And a quick note, tomorrow morning on the program at 9 o'clock, Pastors Roundtable. Earlier today, I had an email. In fact, I'll be writing about this for our website a little later today. But it comes from the group in Hagerman, Idaho, that put together the Christmas tree lighting. That'll happen the weekend after Thanksgiving. And they do this every year. And what caught my attention was that the music is going to come from a local homeschool choir. Think about that one for a moment. So there are some people out there who recognize the value of all of this. We're at 22 minutes after 9 o'clock. It is 39. Our guest is Alex Newman. He's speaking at the College of Southern Idaho. That'll be next Tuesday night here in Twin Falls. The subject is rescuing our children, and he's given us a little history as to how we got into this mess with falling test scores and illiterate children and children who think that socialism is the answer. And Alex, I guess next question is, so where do we go from here? How do we start to turn this around, and can we do it quickly enough to save the culture?
Well, it's a huge problem, and anybody who's hoping for easy solutions, I think, is going to be sorely disappointed. It took generations to get to the point where we're at now, where 70% of our young people, of millennials, say they're going to vote for socialists in the future, where the majority of millennials reject Christianity. It's the first non-Christian majority generation in all of American history. It took generations to get to this point, and it's going to take generations to fix it. But I would say the first step in dealing with this problem is awareness, right? A doctor can't properly treat a patient unless he knows what's wrong with the patient, right? So the first step is an accurate diagnosis. And so we've put together what I think is a very valuable, cost-effective resource that will lay out the basics. It's a special report in the New American Magazine called Rescuing Our Children. And that kind of forms the nucleus of the talk that I'll be giving in Idaho. I've actually given this talk all across the country. I think I'm up at 80, 85 talks in 35 states and multiple foreign countries. So that's step one, right? Get people educated and aware of what happened. We're trying to get 1 million copies of this special report out. Step two is, okay, I'm a parent. I realize the system is terrible. It's toxic. It's destroying my children. It's going to destroy my nation and my freedom. Now what? Well, I think the obvious answer is get your children out as quickly as you can. I tell parents, think of it as a burning building. If the building was on fire, you wouldn't, go to the school board and start a petition and create a committee. You'd run in there, you'd grab your child, and you'd run. And that's what we need to be doing for our children right now. We need to think of the school buildings as if they were on fire and rescue those children as quickly as possible. And I think we can get millions of kids out. I mean, already we have almost 15% of American children are outside of the system, either in a private school or in a good home school. The overwhelming majority of parents already think the public schools are bad. They already want to get their children out. The problem is they don't know how urgent it is. So I think if we could show parents just the truth, just the facts about what's happening, about the fact that these children are coming out dumber than they've ever been in American history. They're coming out unable to tell the difference between right and wrong. They're coming out wanting to make socialism and communism a reality in America. I think that'll be enough to motivate enough parents to get their children out, get them into the safe sanctuary of home schools or Christian schools, private schools of some kind, as quickly as possible. And I think that's the only way we're going to be able to save our country. I know all the objections. I can't afford it. Well, you know what? I'd live in a cardboard box before I'd send my children into this system, and that's the God's honest truth. And we don't need every child in America, right? Homeschooled students are running circles around the victims of government schools, even on the government's own tests, right? They're in the 90th percentile on the government's own standardized test. So I have great confidence that the well-educated children coming out of homeschools across America, coming out of private schools, will become the leaders of the future. I mean, these are the kids who are going to know how to do things. These are the kids who are going to have some historical context to understand reality. And these aren't going to be the corporate leaders, the political leaders of the future. So we don't need all the children, but we do need parents and grandparents and pastors to get involved, recognize that we are in an existential crisis right now. We're fighting for the survival of our nation, the survival of our families, the survival of our churches, the survival of our freedoms, and get involved. Right? All the other political issues that you care about, we're going to lose on every single one if we don't deal with the indoctrination of 85% of our children. So I think that needs to be the most urgent priority for most Americans if we hope to deal with this crisis before it swallows us whole.
But the only politician I ever heard who condemned Common Core was Bobby Jindal, and he apologized. He said if he'd known what it was really going to be, that it would have never come into his state. But this is the thing. We have to have people, when they're coming and they're seeking our votes and they want our backing, we really have to hold their feet to the fire on these issues.
We really do. And, Trump was exactly right. Trump said the public education system had become a tool of progressives for indoctrinating our children. He was absolutely right. He said Common Core is toxic. It is. He promised to get rid of Common Core. Unfortunately, that has not happened yet. But the reality is Common Core is just a symptom. Common Core is not the problem. It's just one small symptom of the problem. The education system was dumbing down our kids even before we got Common Core. True, Common Core truly nationalized it and globalized it in a way that did not exist before. And Common Core made it more dumbed down than it had ever been before. But it's just the next step in the progression. Right. So we do need political leaders who will speak out on these issues. But until the American people demand it, these people are supposed to represent us. If we're dumb and immoral and don't care, politicians are going to be dumb and immoral and not care. So we need to, as the American people, we need to speak out on these issues. We need to demand that our representatives take action. And it all starts with the parents. You are the solution. You change your home, you change your family, and the political system will change as a result. The other side understood that, right? They understood that if they got the children, if they controlled the education system, they would control politics downstream. We need to understand that as well.
We got about a minute and a half to go, and for people who may not be able to attend the event next week or any of the events around the state, if they'd like to learn more, uh, you obviously have a web presence. What would you recommend they do?
Yeah, well, I would say the best place to start would be to go to thenewamerican.com/rescuing our children. And from there, you can get a PDF copy of our special report, or you can get a print copy of the magazine. We're trying to get 1 million of these out across America. We're making a lot of progress. We're on our 7th printing now. We've got people all over the country ordering hundreds, thousands of copies, getting them to pastors in their community. Get a copy of that, read it front to back, and if you agree that this is maybe the most important issue of our time, go back and order 100 and get one to the elders at your church, get one to your neighbors, get one to your congressman, get one to the people who need to know this information so that we can turn it around. And you'll get a lot of the information that I'm going to be speaking on in that special report. I mean, you'll see the proof if you come out and see me speak. I've got the videos showing these people talking. But yeah, please go to thenewamerican.com/rescuing our children.
I want to thank you for your time, Alex, and I know that you're coming out here about the right time of year because half the country is in the deep freeze, and yet we're enjoying our what I don't know. It's politically incorrect, I guess, to call it Indian summer, but you're coming at a good time of year.
Very good. Well, hey, I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you so much for having me on the program, Bill.
Take care, sir.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye now. Alex Newman joining us this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. It's coming up on 9:30. We're at 37. Bill Colley with you until 10 a.m. on Magic Valley This Morning.